Hi, welcome to Model-Based Requirements Documentation. I'm Anant. I'm doing a PhD in the ETCE research group, and I'm going to be giving a few lectures within this topic of model-based requirements documentation. So we already talked a little bit about textual requirements documentation, but now we're going to be talking about model-based requirements documentation a little bit. And this includes models in general, which we're going to talk about why we use models for doing requirements documentation. And then we're going to be talking about some examples like goal models and use cases, and then some information on various perspectives for doing model-based requirements documentation, more specifically data, behavioral, and functional perspectives. And then we're going to be focusing a lot of our attention towards something called agent-oriented modeling, which is a specific type of model-based documentation, which is going to be our focus for preceding lectures. So first we start to talk about models in general. So we're going to be talking about the difference between using a requirements-based model and a design-based model. So models are frequently used for system design. So these are usually called design models. And an example of this is an architectural model. So a model that describes the architecture of your system. And there's a considerable difference between requirements models and design models. So we're going to specifically be talking about requirements models in this lecture course. So requirements models, they generally depict the aspects of the underlying problem that you're trying to solve with your system. And design models document different solutions that you choose to solve these problems during system development. So there's this term model that we're using over and over, so it's a good point to start to define this term. So according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, so a model is something that has a structural design. It's usually a miniaturized representation of something, and in this case, the something is your system that you're trying to design. And usually it's a system of postulates, data, and inferences that are presented as a mathematical form, as an entity or a state of affairs, basically. So this is a super bookish definition, but during this lecture we make it super simple. So the model is basically an abstract representation of an existing reality or a reality that we would like to create with our proposed systems. Talking about different properties of models, models can be a mapping of reality, which basically means that aspects of your observed reality are mapped onto model elements. Sometimes these could be descriptive model creation, so models which documents existing reality, or it could be prescriptive, basically, which means that models are prototypes for a fictitious reality or a reality which you would like to have. Models can be both descriptive and prescriptive at the same time. So for example, you could have a model that describes the requirements or the needs of a stakeholder, something that is descriptive. And then based on this, the same model can prescribe a use case of the system that addresses these stakeholder requirements. Models can also be a reduction of reality. So sometimes you don't have to capture the complete reality inside of your models. Instead, your models can reduce the size of your captured reality to something small so that only particular aspects of your system are modeled. And during this process, you generally summarize your subject matter, and it's basically a compression of your system. There's also the pragmatic property. So usually your models serve a very specific purpose. So models are generally sit in this case in this very specific context, and they are not general purpose, essentially. So the purpose of your model affects the construction of the models and what reduction you're going to do to your reality, essentially. So ideally, this reduction contains only information pertaining to the purpose of the model that you defined earlier. And this is defined through syntax and semantics. So syntax defines the modeling elements that you're going to be using, and it specifies what the valid combinations you're going to use between these different elements. And the semantics is basically the definition of what these elements mean, what these individual model elements mean together. And this basically forms the foundation for how these models are going to be interpreted, which is very, very important for requirement documentation, is how you interpret these documentations. But even within this syntax and semantics, you can have models that are formal, informal, and also semi-formal. So in this lecture, we're going to be talking about many informal models, but the next lecture, lecture 9, we're going to be talking about more formal models, which are more mathematical in nature. So some advantages of using models. So as a general rule, humans handle graphically depicted knowledge information better. This is because it's generally perceived faster and also memorized faster. And in general, this also applies to requirements engineering, which is why we like to use graphically depicted information in models for requirements engineering. This also allows you to have like a strictly defined focus. So not everything that is part of the focus of the model is, so everything that's not part of the focus of the model is removed. And basically all of the noise or background information which is not relevant is essentially not included in your model. So it focuses your understanding of what your model is describing. And this results in a harmonized level of abstraction. Essentially, the modeling elements dictate the level of abstraction between your different types of models. And this abstraction basically results in a reduction of your complexity with your models. And there are essentially 3 main mechanisms of doing this abstraction. The first is selection. You could select particular aspects to be depicted by the model, and other aspects can be ignored completely. So you could remove them from being part of the model. The other type is called aggregation. So essentially you can combine various aspects of your model into you could combine aspects of the whole system into an aggregated aspect, and then you can condense information as a part of a single model. You could also do a classification or generalization. So common features where different aspects of the system can be combined into a single model. And essentially it suppresses the differences between the common features of different models. And the commonalities are represented as generalized information in these models. An example of a model-based documentation can be UML. So if you are a computer scientist or if you're studying computer science, you've probably heard about the unified modeling language called UML. And the current version at the time of recording is UML version 2.5.1. And essentially what it is a graphical notation for the analysis, design, and documentation of object-oriented systems. UML is not, however, a development process. So it doesn't tell you how to develop your systems. It's very specialized for a very specific topic. It's complete and formal. It cannot be compiled with additional information and makes it semi-formal. It's also capable of semantics. So UML only provides the syntax for how to define a model, but the semantics of understanding the various interpretations of your model is highly dependent on the reader of the document. So it is why it's very tricky to handle very good UML diagrams.